in this esteemed group of people. Let's see. We have a lot to talk about today. And the first thing I want to talk about is I have a student in New York. Basically, an artist, philosopher, musician, whatever. And he came to his lesson on Sunday, and the first thing he said, "Oh, did you read in the New York Times where they were discussing something called the immortal pill? Did you read about that?" And it's one of these articles that purports to predict the future of medicine, and it says that a pill is just around the corner which will extend life. I don't know whether it said indefinitely, but it's a very interesting concept. How long have people been considering that idea?
As long as
Well, as long as, awakened thought or consciousness has been around, right? It's a theme that's explored in Prometheus, and it's certainly a theme that predates Prometheus. Well, I think that's an interesting thing to explore, to talk about. And it relates to one of the specific ideas why I do this kind of thing. And I think one would have to admit that it is a kind of fringe activity at the Curtis Institute. But nonetheless, the impetus behind it came from John Brockman's organization and a website that I just happened to stumble upon through various other articles or books that I had read. Anybody look up who John Brockman was? I'm not sure he's still alive. I would think that he is.
still alive. He's 77.
And what is he primarily noted for?
Wearing long-brimmed hats.
Yes. No.
He's an author, but he writes about science, or he writes like science.
I hope I have the name right. They need to develop that pill very quickly before it disintegrates.
He's written books with titles like "What is your dangerous idea? This idea must die," and "The Third Culture."
He's also noted for having established the
Edge Foundation?
Yes. The Edge Foundation, which is incorporated into a kind of blog or a website, and it's available at edge.org. Is that not correct? Isn't that a website? Yes. Well, that idea has been around for quite a while, and it started out as a think tank in which people like Steven Pinker, Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, I think he's still at Tufts, right? One of the most visible and public philosophers of today, along with many other people in science, political, philosophical world, whatever, all from all areas, and they came together to discuss the emerging issues of contemporary society, and they explore the cutting-edge ideas that have been developed or put forward. And long time ago, this marks about the 12th anniversary of this particular scenario at Curtis. And many things have happened in the world since then, many changes. And I strongly feel, in my manifesto about this project, that it's absolutely necessary that you be in touch with the world in that way, and that you explore these ideas. And what did he say about his ideas?
Well, I don't know much about his ideas.
No,
but
what did that article say? It said two things about ideas. Get rid of one idea and embrace another idea. And he is interested in exploring radical ideas about things. And in essence, those ideas that can be thrown out. That philosophy actually turned into what is known as disruptive creativity. And it was first developed significantly, in that byline, was significantly developed by an advertising agency. And that was the advertising agency Chiat Day. Anybody know what that is?
I've heard of that.
Yes. It was the advertising agency that really put Apple on the map. That agency was responsible for producing the 1984 Apple commercial, and they have had that Apple account for some time. And I don't know whether they still do it today, but that's their slogan, creative disruption. And I think that one of the basic ideas in here is a kind of creative disruption. That phrase is now like jaded, I think, and overused like everything. From air guitar for next week, I would like for you to read the essay, The Heresy of Zone Defense. What does that refer to?
Basketball.
Yes, it does. How do you know that? Have you read the essay? You've already read the essay?
Yeah.
Yes. It refers to basketball. And Hickey is a great sports fan. And, of course, he was a terrific fan of the Lakers. And this particular essay tries to tie an idea in basketball and a very famous event that happened between the Lakers and actually the Phillies back in the 80s. And that was back when both those teams were like, really, really hot. And it's a very interesting and insightful essay, and I'd like for you to read that for next week. And it concerns ideas behind the edge effect, and not the edge effect. That's Brockman's idea. It's nobody else's idea except for that. And it comes, all of this jargon comes from that. I think I've mentioned this before. And I do think that that's a terrifically important idea. I also remember reading an article, not an article, like it was a presentation that Hawking made, and I assume that someone else read it or it was transcribed or whatever. And it was on the limits of knowledge. Is knowledge unlimited? And he makes a very interesting statement in which he says that up until about 1300, it was possible for a person to know everything. But after about 1300, that became increasingly more impossible. Is there a limit to knowledge? Is there a limit to the capacity for knowledge?
Well, I mean, there's a finite number of people alive right now, and nobody can know an infinite amount of stuff. So
Why?
even though our capacity to learn things is always we can always learn more things, I suppose that there is a limited amount of things that are known by everybody that's alive right now. I don't know if that's what you were asking though.
And you can't know an infinite amount of
Yeah.
things because that would take infinitely
Yeah,
long.
exactly.
There are an infinite amount of things that could be known.
True.
Probably.
It is known.
Well, I don't know. That leads to the question, what is the unknown? But I think the logical answer to that, and some people, well, it's a prevalent idea that what I'm about to say is not true, but I think it's bound to be true. And that is, all organisms are limited in a certain way. They have boundaries, they have limits. And why is it that we think as human beings that kind of limit does not apply to us? That the potential for human inquiry and knowledge is essentially infinite, and that one day, one time, human beings will be able to know everything.
Well, because we've crossed a really big boundary in terms of, I guess, knowing things. Because first off, we have the ability to communicate with one another and store things that we know for hundreds of years. So while
But-
knowing everything is kind of unattainable, I think that we've developed this knack for sort of reaching what was once thought to be impossible.
Are we considering that knowledge includes both things that we know to be true as well as things that we prove to be untrue? Because once you include knowing things to be false, you have absolutely an infinity, and it can never all be known.
Well, not to get too touchy-feely, but I'm going to do it anyway. Most people in this room, including you, I don't know hardly anything about, really, like to the core. How can I possibly know about all these other people and things out there?
Well, isn't that one of my leitmotifs?
Just thought I'd say it, that's all.
Well, thanks for sharing. Well, what is the last statement in the Tractatus or Tractatus?
Of that which is known. Silence.
Louder, please.
I don't know the exact phrasing, but if you don't know about something, don't talk about it.
That's essentially it, yes. All that can be known can be said. The rest is silence, right? Can't be said. But at any rate, why would I assume that there is a limit to human knowledge?
You couldn't possibly know truly everything.
Yeah, well, what is that? What is everything? The theory
Exactly
of
what it
everything.
sounds like.
What is the theory of everything? There are some scientists that believe
Quantum
one
gravity.
day that we will know the secret of matter. We have a few problems to work out, I think, right? But then the part of it that qualifies that statement is knowledge of this universe, which automatically puts a limit on that, right? Because it implies that there possibly, conceivably, and more likely, and positively so, other universes.
But isn't it still a finite infinity? Is everything that you might discover to know about, it opens up many, many more things that you don't know.
Well,
So it's
Well,
bounded, but
yes, well,
it's
that-
infinite.
that is why.
Oh, that's
Well, it could be. Yes, that's certainly a logical concept or a mathematical concept, right?
Any level of infinity
How is that? How is one way that is expressed mathematically? A simple set of symbols.
The numbers between 0 and 1, for instance.
And what would you do to indicate that?
C for
represent-
continuum.
What?
C for continuum. It's like a script C. It's got like some pointy edges.
What else defines that?
Defines what exactly?
What is an interval?
Oh, it's the range between. It's the continuum between two numbers expressed by a lower bound and an upper bound. Sometimes inclusive, sometimes non-inclusive.
So is that an infinity?
An interval is not an infinity. No, an interval is an interval.
But it expresses a what?
Continuum of numbers.
Right. And the continuum is what?
Uncountably infinite.
And how is that represented? Generally represented.
Parentheses or square brackets lower down.
Square brackets.
No, not always.
Well, that's the standard notation.
Isn't
At least
an
my
interval-
mother taught me that.
Isn't an interval, can't an interval also be with rounded brackets?
I think that means something different.
Isn't that a set?
The notation could
No,
be
open
of
interval and
change.
closed interval. No? Yeah.
What is an open interval?
Well, rounded brackets, parentheses. One
This is
second.
bringing back memories.
One second. Let me
No, I don't
fact
want to
check
get
myself.
sidetracked on that.
Okay.
I'm just talking about the limits of understanding, the limits of knowledge. What gives the human mind the impression that it is infinite? Or do people think their minds are infinite?
The ability to think.
Or that they are infinite?
Well, because we can like comprehend what infinity is, like whereas.
How can you comprehend that?
Well, like the concept that like maybe, like, there are some things that are so large, you know, or so small that we like we can be aware of the fact that like there are things that are like too large or too small to understand. I mean, I guess
Well,
like,
how do you know that if you don't know how large or how small things are?
I guess because we could know that like our like ability to like calculate their size is limited. Maybe. Brian has something.
It all boils around the concept of the unknown, does it not?
Yeah.
What is the definition of the unknown?
That which we do not know.
Well, what kind of definition is that?
A very known one.
Yes, it is. What do you call definitions like that?
Useless.
Circular.
Tautological.
Useless, right? What?
Tautological.
Yes, tautological. Okay. Tautology is I didn't mean to get sidetracked on this, but it's a property of logical systems. Right? Okay, speaking of logical systems, let's look at this example of counterpoint on the blackboard. I've done something like this before, and I think in ages past, Lydia and I have battled this out on one occasion. And I come back to it because I might have another opinion about it. First of all, let's join this infinity. Okay?
I don't think that's an
Couldn't it run on forever in either direction? All right. Okay. What's the consonants here?
So,
Yes, that's right. 5, 3. Right? Okay, that's easy. Now, what's the next consonants? 6, 3. Yes? So, what's the relationship of this downbeat to that downbeat?
4, 6, change. Is that a trick question? No.
But, well, yes,
Not-
actually,
kind
and
of.
this is an important thing, where would the voice exchange be? Not between adjacent voices,
It's
yes?
complicated. It happens in
Right.
3 voices.
There, yes? Okay? All right, so the frame consonances are correct, yeah? Well, now look at this. This is a combined species, yes? It has a whole note line, if this is expressing some kind of do fundamental, right? Whether embedded or global, right? Nonetheless, it's doing that momentarily. That is confirmed by these voices, and actually by that being its boundary fifth, right? So this actually is all within one sound, okay? Now look at the specific species parts. That is a consonant, that is a consonant. They're all like fundamental consonants. This interval is a primary consonant in the environment of this sonority, right? This sonority is composed of the merge of these two thirds, which gives you this sonority. Yes, that's how that is formed. So that's all according to Hoyle. Okay? Now, that's the passing tone. It's occurring exactly correctly. Now, let's take away the second species and let's look at the construction of the third species. Remember that the third species line is at least 3 levels of generation. So the first level would be the initial frame consonants. And then the second level would be whatever the second species or the directional property in this. What would it be? The only thing it could possibly be is what? That, yes? Am I correct? Correct me if I'm, when I get next to the blackboard, I go bonkers. All right, okay? So what is the function of that note? That's actually in the exact second species position. How would you define that?
Skip passing tone.
What?
The regular passing
A regular passing tone?
Well,
So
just
we
a second
know
species. It would be
Skip passing
it's a
tone.
skip passing tone, right?
Oh, I see, yeah.
Okay, now look. All right, this is what my mother used to say in her math classes in a very loud voice. She used to scream. You could hear her all over the first hall. Now look, and you mean to tell me, those were her 2 favorite phrases. Well, and they were used brutally on me. Right, okay. She thought, well, never mind. Okay, so in second species, you're dealing with abstract processes of how a dissonance can connect two consonances. So every single thing that you do to represent the forward momentum, the connecting momentum, if you have this, then you have that, right? Has got to relate somehow to the passing dissonance. Well, as we've said several times, there are 3 things. You have the passing tone, which is defined specifically as proceeding in the same direction as the first member of the conditioning environment and to the second member of the conditioning environment by step in the same direction. That's it. There are no exceptions to that. There are no dissonances that are created that do not have that operational significance. Okay? So if you know that if the cantus firmus is moving, jumping all around, it has its own origin in the interplay of consonants and dissonance, thereby making it self a polyphonic construction, then you must fulfill that responsibility from frame to frame. If you cannot get a passing tone all the time, which you cannot because of the nature of the fixed voice, then you must use something that either substitutes for that passing motion or be derived from that passing motion technique. Something that will imply that or is a substitute for that. Why would you have a substitute? 2 reasons. I think they might be interrelated. Why would you have something that substitutes for a passing tone that you cannot use or manage?
Voice leading.
Voice leading, which would imply that you're leading to either a forbidden fusion interval, or worse than that, you would imply an arrival at the next frame consonants on a what? Dissonance, right? The collision of the passing tone with the next frame, given the nature of the cantus firmus, would make you arrive at the wrong interval or an unacceptable interval. Now, please bear in mind, such collisions happen all the time. But there has to be a justification for such things. In what Schenker calls free composition, that happens. But there are reasons why that happens, specific reasons. Well, they just can't all of a sudden start happening. That would be a stipulation. So there has to be some motivational reason why those things happen. that is collision of dissonances. Now, what is the relationship between, therefore, the second species and the third species? We have, in relationship to the Canis firmus, a perfectly logical progression. But when we combine the second species with the third species, incredible things happen. Now, I know that you can all hear this in your head. If you hear it as one unit, does that sound bad? No, it sounds great. All right, but if you start scrutinizing the relationship of the two contrapuntal voices, you see what? That's a dissonance, right? Okay? Isn't that a dissonance?
Yeah.
Okay? Then this is a dissonance, right? And is that a dissonance with that?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my gosh!
It's a
Right?
voice exchange.
And then this is a dissonance. Look at the pileup of dissonances in this, right? What justifies something like that?
Counterpoint.
That's the correct answer, right? Let's go beyond, right? Like Star Trek Beyond. That's such a great film. In that film, you notice that every single character has reversed hairdos, right? Chris Pine used to part his hair on this side, now he parts it on that side. And who's the guy that is the samurai? What's his name?
Oh, who was in that film about the train?
I don't know. Oh, come on. You know all the
Sulu?
characters' names. What?
Are you talking about the character of Sulu?
Yes, isn't that it?
Well, that's the character's name.
I guess that's the character's name. At any rate, everything is reversed in that film. But that has nothing to do with this. Okay. All right. Well, why is it that you can do this? These are blatant dissonances. Shouldn't the law of consonance say that when you have a dissonance, you must maintain that the two dissonances be in a consonant relationship?
It eventually is.
Yeah, they are.
Well, with the base,
And how is that?
Ray.
That's not consonant.
Oh, Ray
Yeah,
is.
but the D is so.
I mean, in relation to the base, they're
Sweet
like
like the detritus.
the second species and they're both fine. It's just when you combine them.
Yeah, but what about the relationship between these two voices? This is an incredible collection of dissonance.
Between
If you say this is consonant with that, but it's not consonant with that.
I mean, it's dissonant at different times, you know? There's always something that's consonant there.
If we're, really?
Yeah.
If that is supposedly the fundamental second species progression, well, that does not create a consonance with this. What does?
The D.
D.
If you say that is, right, then
Oh,
it jumps here.
We said D,
Oh,
not
I
S.
said D.
If you say that does,
No.
it's not this. So the D. So if I put that D there, wait a minute, wait just a minute. If I put the D aligned with this, right, that would be implying that these two, that is a dissonant tone, that is what?
Dissonant.
Dissonant is, what is that? That would
C.
imply that you're leaping into a dissonance. Yeah?
All in the Paggiatura and
No,
Walk
don't
home.
use that term. If I had some machine like appeared on the original series of Star Trek, the Thought Transformer, I would put you underneath it to eradicate the term appoggiatura.
all right. What would you like me to
I'll
say?
put
in its
everybody
place?
underneath it. I've already been under it. I don't even know what an appoggiatura is. How do you
Accented
explain
dissonance.
this?
Well,
Well, it's just a feature of the rhythm.
it's just a feature
ultimately.
of the chalk.
Yes?
If you were to, for instance, have the upper voice saying sol mi re, with re falling on the third beat, and then you just insert a passing tone between sol and mi. for instance, if it were a quarter note triplet or something on the first two beats,
Whoa.
If you did some kind of rhythmic
it's
compression,
just a rhythmic displacement.
right? That's it. It's a displacement, right? So where should this note really occur?
A beat earlier.
Yes, it should occur here, right?
Right.
So that goes here, and this then allows that note to come in at the correct time, right?
So that means that
But unfortunately, there's another note missing, right? So what would this rhythm be? Let's work it out.
is that an F or an E?
That's an F.
Oh,
So this should be mi, yes?
So it's sol, mi, fa, re, do. Or just sol, mi, re. Oh,
yeah. Otherwise, it's parallel.
yeah.
Isn't that correct?
Yeah, it's okay.
Right? Okay. Now, what happens in the third species voice? And it's a typical feature. This is the logical consequence of this, right? This is how the consonances line up. Yep. This is a dissonant tone, right? Fulfilling the third space in here. And this is a dissonant tone. They are both consonant. They are both passing tones in relationship to the cantus firmus. You will notice that this interval opens up a third space. And so we can amplify that. And in doing so, this shifts this tone to the quarter note pulse, right? This is what I maintain, that this is what you're hearing. That. But in order to propel the rhythmic motion forward, we have this kind of configuration. And it's a simple idea of displacement. Rhythmic displacement. Yeah? Has nothing to do with meter, per se. It's strictly a contrapuntal function. And the same thing happens in language when you add affixes to words, either before or after. And my famous example is telegraph, telegraphic. It shifts the rhythmic accent or the prosodic structure. And then in the phrase telegraphic communication, it creates a different kind of prosodic structure from telegraph communication. That happens all the time. So the prosodic structure has to do with displacement of underlying features, but it in no way, in music, changes the fundamental relationship of consonants and dissonance. You can't do that. If you do that, you're writing something that is chaotic. It could very well be creative. It could be very well viewed as art, which means a putting together. Right? But it would not be according to the principles of natural language and or natural music systems. Okay, this is a fundamental computational process. All right, and the reason I bring all of that up is because we're going to listen to, or discuss, try to, two different pieces. Now, in our progression through music history, I'm trying to point out how things like this actually evolve. And we are going to look at two miraculous pieces of music. The first one is by Dufay, and it is a mass movement for social justice. No, it's a mass movement that is from, that is based on the chanson that we looked at so closely last week. When I see your pale face. And we have discussed the kind of theological or religious connections of the pale-faced mass with the arrival of the Shroud of Turin, which was, owned by the Savoy family, right? And so this is a mass actually in honor of that holy relic that arrived at Turin. So people say, what is her name? Leslie Robertson. I think she's the musicologist that did the research on this. And the definitive edition of this is by Alessandro Plancha, who is a respectable musicologist. Okay, how are we going here?
Great.
Are we having problems?
No.
It's the latter one.
Is it this first one here? Are we ready?
What?
Is it the first one?
Yes. All right. Everyone ready?
Okay.
Which one does it say?
It says Misa se la face pel gloria. Oh.
But is there a key? Does it say A or B?
It doesn't, but the music matches this because it has the score on the screen.
No. Well, you're gonna
B, A, oh, that one says A. The next one says B flat.
B flat. Let's do the B flat one.
Okay.
Well, wait a minute. All this is notated in C or Do, right? They never sing these things in the key that they're notated in, right? This is the simplest thing. I cannot, it's just a statement. I can't do that. So I searched and searched for something that actually sounded kind of like this. And there are two versions. One is in A, the other one's in B flat. Well, if you've got the one in A, then you've got to use soprano clef, right? You have to use soprano clef for the upper three voices, right? But if you do it in B flat, you use the tenor clef, and then the bass is in the alto clef, I think. Okay.
The sound isn't working.
What?
The sound is not on. I don't know how to work this.
I think game,
Oh.
video game.
I'll return
No, click video game on the input. Up, there. Okay, find video game.
Ah.
Thank you, Ryan. Are you the one that's been playing video games? All right, let's go again. Be patient. Okay, can you skip ahead a little bit? All right.
Sure. How's that?
Go like in 14 or something like that.
14.
No. Well, we passed it. Anyway, stop it. There are two things that precede the actual Gloria, and one is a kind of imitative, canonic setting of the original chanson with this ostinato in the bass. And it's odd that it's, what two notes are in the bass? Dun, 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 right? That's very curious. The next thing, which I'm not going to play, is an organ intabulation of that chanson. And it shows the beginning of figurative devices, instrumental figurative devices that eventually turn into what we consider instrumental music. Now, okay, I think the beginning of this particular chant is 1506.
1506.
It's a good year.
I'm not hearing anything. Oh, keep going.
Yeah, well, wait, no, it's a good thing you can stop there. All right, are you all trying to, actually, I think we're going to repeat this. are you trying to follow all four of these parts?
Yeah.
Where is the chanson melody?
10 or 2, isn't it?
Yeah. It's in the next to the last line, right?
I can barely hear it.
Well,
Maybe that's
unfortunately, yes. But it is there, and the reason I like this performance is because it's not so blatantly loud and dominating everything, but it makes it kind of difficult to hear the rhythmic things that are in it. Last week, if you have the handout that I gave you, it shows you the tenor notation. It is in its original form, and it is in a in a time and prolation, but there's a canon that goes along with that. Dufay apparently only wrote the tenor melody out once, and he specifies a canon for the performance of both the Gloria and the Credo. Now, what is a canon? You said it was.
When Clown wants to do a shtick, you get
Yes, and that we decided that was not what canon means in this context. The canon is a rule or a law, and it specifies that here's the tenor. The first time, the values are augmented times 3. Crescit is not the word. It says crescit in tres or triplet. It says augmented in 3 times. Then the second time you repeat it, it's in 2 times as fast. The third time is in the regular notation, the original notation. So the given values, as is, yachet, right? So this technique, and this was apparently Dufay's first attempt at the construction of the ordinary of the Mass using this particular technique and the idea of the contratenor bassus. What is the contratenor bassus? That's the tenor number 1 in the bottom, yes? And it's constantly crossing over and below the cantus firmus, the Solifaccia Pali, cantus firmus. And besides that, even in the interludes where the 2 tenor voices drop out, or at least you only have 2 moving voices, which don't involve the cantus firmus, those are the times when you actually hear the polyphony, at least to my ear, moving in a much more directed fashion, much more melodic fashion. When the cantus firmus enters, you still get the orientation, but it all of a sudden seems extremely paralyzed and limited in a certain way. Now, the idea that you could use a tenor voice and instruct the performance of that as play it 3 times as long, then twice, then the regular value, is an older 14th century technique. And that harks back to what I mentioned at the end of the class last time, to what technique? Was one of the technical innovations in the Ars Nova motet. And that is the yes, isorhythm. What is an isorhythm?
Same rhythm.
You take a melodic fragment and then you organize it successively in these rhythmic patterns. And the rhythmic patterns don't necessarily have the same length as the melodic pattern. So the melodic pattern could be very short. And so it would take X number of times to a repetition of the rhythmic pattern that you've created to fulfill the length. Did I say that right? Did I say that the melodic was short? It would take X number of times of the melodic repetition to fulfill the isorhythm, or the rhythm itself. Then you could have that reversed. You could have a very long melody and you could have a short rhythmic feature that is repeated X number of times until the melody is finished. So this is essentially the same kind of technique, although slightly transformed. Did you discuss that in music history? You did?
You did? Were we in the same class?
Yeah. We spent like a day on the art stuff.
What?
We did?
I remember. Maybe you weren't there.
One would
Okay, well, this is related to that technique. But now, the main thing about it is, I want you to listen to this again, and I want you to try to figure out the rhythmic flow in this and the relationship to the triple augmentation of the cantus firmus melody, or the tenor melody.
So go
You
for it.
remember that melody, yes? It's hard to hear, but see what effect that line, that single line has on the rest of the polyphony. You're going to find some very interesting things. Let's try it one more time.
From the beginning or from
Yes,
just
from the
left
beginning, from 1506 or wherever it was.
off? 1506?
Listen carefully. Now I'm going to stop and start this. Oh, by the way, what is that little fragment called? Incipit or incipit, right? The incipit. That's always intoned by the cantor or the priest or whomever, right? And the polyphonic composition begins with the second phrase. Same thing with the credo. Okay, here we go. I'm going to stop and start. All right, stop. The first thing you hear is what?
Imitation.
Yes, imitation at what interval? At the octave, yes? All right, now it's not strict imitation. It's just the beginnings of these phrases that begin with imitative counterpoint. That is an innovative feature of Dufay. And it turns into, later, systematic imitation, about 70 years from now. All right, let's keep going. Stop. All right. What has happened?
Similar motion. So
Listen to it in B flat. What has happened? You start in B flat. The first kind of articulation, although it's overlapped, is B flat. The next little phrase, omnibus, does what?
Wait, the first one ended in B flat?
Yeah, it's horizontalizing a B flat chord, doesn't it?
Where does it end?
Let's listen to it one more time. There it is.
It's
Right.
that.
That one, right? And then the superius drops out and you get omnibus. It's overlapped, but there is a stopping on the B flat.
I thought it was.
You start on an octave and then you end on what? Play it again. Yes, thank you. We can go on. And what is the second one?
Second what?
The second phrase, little omnibus. Play it again from the beginning. Is that a B flat?
No,
it's a
that's
C and a
ba and a do.
Yeah.
Play it again.
Ba, ba, do.
Again. That's B flat.
But that's not the end.
Yeah, the next.
No, that's the first chord. The chord changes after that. And where does that occur?
The next down.
On the next one we go.
Isn't there a word change?
Well, in the
No,
In the
it's just-
superiors?
And the lower
works.
part.
but it's all part of the same phrase of etin terapax.
I'm talking about the horizontalization of the sonority.
Isn't the text and the sonority related?
No,
What?
no, they're not. As a matter of fact, the text was never underlaid in a correct way. It was just written. This is completely conjectural. There's no relationship to the text in the music here. It's completely abstract.
What does conjectural mean?
It means that it's undecided.
Oh.
That somebody had to decide to put the text specifically in these locations. Now, it can be implied by certain things and by, obviously, the relationship of consonants and dissonance in the single voices. Also, how is this composed or put together?
Contrapuntally?
Well, what does that mean? How did Dufay do this? Did he just wake up one night and say, Missa Salafatia Pali, and then wrote it down? Or improvised it?
Maybe.
Probably improvised.
Depends on what you imply by improvisation. Improvisation means not previously seen before and then suddenly you see it. You put it down. This is successive composition. It isn't simultaneous composition.
What's
Simultaneous composition does not come about until the next century, when every detail of the relationship between consonants and dissonance and the prolongation of dissonant intervals is firmly established.
what is successive composition?
One voice at a time. Now, because this starts out in a duet version, we might assume that these two voices were conceived simultaneously. But that's a conjecture. So listen to the music. Where does it make the transition from the B flat to the F? Those are overlapping segments, I agree. But you hear the B flat ending and then it immediately moves to play it. There it is.
On the last measure of the first line?
Well, it's the last two bars or whatever. The transition to 5 occurs, or the 5th degree occurs, right? I'm not sure that it's actually the 5th degree either, right? But clearly you hear this in B flat, right? And that F is in relationship to the B flat. I'm not certain at all whether that's the tonality, right? Then that's going to bring up the idea of so-called modes. What is the purpose of studying music history? Why would you study this?
Curiosity.
Well, besides that. Well, curiosity killed the cat. Why would you study this? To be well-rounded.
To gain something.
It's like the edge effect. No.
Because counterpoint.
Why? Why?
Because it's just music.
What does it show you about music?
Its origins. Its evolution. How people
What is the whole topic of this? 12 pieces that made music. That's what the title of this is supposed to be, right? This is like the 4th or the 5th piece in the exploration. What do I mean by made music? Given my notions about music, which are pretty radical, I think, but probably true.
developed on the notion of consonance and dissonance.
Yeah, it's a discovery of things that exist in the mind. They're in the process of discovering the things that create what constitutes the vocabulary or the symbols that can be used and recursively combined. and hierarchically structured to produce large structures. This is the first effort at trying to produce a large-scale structure of a piece with training wheels. Right? That's why you do this. Not to study the fact that Dufay was born in what date? You don't even know that. You know anything about Dufay's life? I do, because it was pounded in my head by Dr. Rees. You know anything about him? He was the illegitimate son of a woman and a priest. Did you know that? And what cathedral was he associated with? What are his dates? Who was he? Where did he live? He's considered to be what kind of composer? Pretty good one. Burgundian composer. If he was Burgundian, he must have been associated with the court at Burgundy. It was the most famous one of those as duke or leader of the court at Burgundy. Ruler. Philip the Good. What's important about Philip the Good?
He was good.
The elaborate music festival or celebration. Not celebration, it was to ramp up energy for a military parade. No, ramp up energy for a crusade. Why? What date was that?
Crusades.
Yes. What happened in 1453?
Constantinople.
Yes, the fall of Constantinople to the infidels. Constantinople to the infidels. Right?
They weren't trying to have a crusade after that, were they?
It was to drum up energy for a crusade to go back and conquer Constantinople
The last
for
crusade.
for all Christendom. So this festival, the Feast of the Pheasant, actually was, I think, February 17. How appropriate. It's during Black History Month. Doesn't have anything to do with anything, right? Isn't February supposed to be Black History Month?
It is.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
I thought you
of
just
course.
meant because that's like right around, like it's
It has
February
nothing to
23rd.
do with anything. February the 17th, this Feast of the Pheasant was an elaborate, one of these elaborate parties. It
Do
could
we
have
all
been
know
in-
what a pheasant is?
could have been in Palm Beach, right? And
Yeah.
what famous piece of music was presumably performed at this?
This one?
The massive.
No,
massive tail.
a motet, a very elaborate motet of Dufay called Lamentations on the Fall of Constantinople.
Oh. Is that
You
like
can
15
go on and on and on about this,
Is that
right?
one like 15 minutes long?
What?
That piece, that motet?
Yes.
Okay.
Presumably it accommodated the person dressed in long white robes riding on a white horse backwards. Probably Oliver Delamare. She's the one who we have a description of this event. I mean, I could go on and on like this. It makes absolutely no difference. That is not why you study music history. That is not why you study it. To do all these things, and who cares if a group of people, a band or whatever, popped out of a pie or whatever. It's just insane.
Well, I mean, if they hadn't had all this patronage, this music never would have been written. So I guess it is kind of.
All right, well, let's just say that and move on,
Okay.
okay? And actually talk about what the music is doing and what phenomenal things were unfolding from about 800 to this time, right? Which is about 1450, mid-century. I think specifically 1453. I don't know, something like that. Okay, so let's go on. Now, what happens there?
Octave.
Bone voluntatis.
Start the Bone Voluntatis again. All right, what? That entire phrase is what? It's a prolongation of the F, yes? Okay? And what other chords do you hear in it, or sonorities do you hear in it?
B.
Do you hear a B flat sonority in it?
Yes.
Yes, that is not, you definitely don't hear that in relationship to the opening B flat. You hear it in relationship to this prolonged F. Even the cadence is in F, right?
Yes.
Which requires a ficta, which in this case is not F sharp, it's E natural, right? That's so confusing. It doesn't matter. Okay, continuing. Immediately back, what? B flat for a minute, okay? Now, the fixed voice comes in here. Please pay attention. Where are we?
Second page.
Number 19.
B flat, yes? Okay. Now let's see if you can't discern the cantus firmus of this. Whoa, you hear that? Wait a minute. Stop. Do you hear that?
Which? What?
The tenor voice. You should be listening to the tenor voice. That doesn't seem to like really coincide with anything, does it?
Mhm.
It does in what rhythmic value? Are you listening to this?
3-2.
Go back just a little bit, but it's hard to hear. I'm trying to make it right here. That's what? It creates a what with the other voices? What? A syncopation. Yeah? It sounds like it's running in its own like atmosphere. That's just a like banal example. Let's continue. Listen.
Is
Right. You don't think that sounds strange?
why did the instrument switch voice parts?
There's two instruments.
They're two instruments.
I didn't.
One's playing bass and one's playing tenor.
Okay.
There's only two voices.
Yes, I didn't listen carefully.
Well, that's what
Tenor's
makes
really
this so
soft.
difficult
Yeah.
to hear at the bottom.
I didn't. Well, I only heard the bass when it first came in, so that's why I thought that it switched.
But were you listening to the tenor there?
Yes.
Yeah, it's like, it's in an exact rhythmic relationship, but it's in divisions of the prolation, so it's syncopated, right? And it seems like to me it's just like meandering around in its own sphere, right? What relationship would that, I mean, the text is printed here, because it's conceivable that you sing it, right? Okay, well, I think I'm going to stop that because we could go on and on and on with that. Because I do want to get to some Zoarca. Now, so what could you say about the rhythm in this? And what can you say about the rhythm? Do you think it is metrically generated? Is it regular?
No.
No.
There's no meter in this. I defy you to give me the, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. right? You
Changes,
can't
but
do
it's not-
that because there's a constant interplay between the perfectum tempus and the imperfectum prolation. So what does that mean? It means that the brev is running in tripart division, yes? But the semibrev is running, or excuse me, the longs are in tripart division, but the brevs are in duple division. Hence the 3-2, yes?
Yes.
And so, what is the peculiar thing about that? Well, let's just say 3-4. How many eighth notes are in 3-4?
6.
6. You can group them in two ways. 3 groups of 2 or 2 groups of 3, yes?
So
And it would produce exactly, you can make everything line up that way.
So is it one of the first instances of sort of like a pattern of like 2 rather than 3?
No,
Because
that
it
was
is
in
divided-
that began to emerge at the beginning of the 14th century with the Ars Nova.
Oh, right.
And it was developed along this line much more clearly.
Okay.
And there could be no establishment of the dissonant, consonants, dissonance, consonants until duple division of a particular frame was developed. But this has nothing to do with meter. So the rhythmic development that occurs in music relates specifically to the relationship between consonants and dissonance and the sonorities that are prolonged. Has nothing to do now with either the text or meter. It has to do with the musical technical devices for the organization of sound through consonants and dissonance. And we're in the process of discovering these kind of innate properties of the mind that facilitate this. So I would say that the mind is innately structured in some manner to acquire this. And presumably it's because of the nature of the biological or combinatorial or computational property of something in the mind. It has something to do with neurological structure. Now, the progress of all of this in terms of neurological structure has not gotten very far because nobody understands what the encoding mechanism is. But the artifactual evidence, that is, the things that you see on the page in language and also in music, point clearly to these things. And that is what I'm trying to get across in this procession of development. It is not evolution. It's a discovery of things that are already present in the setting of parameters. In essence, it's similar to a child's acquisition of a language. It could conceivably produce any known language. But when it hears something, it sets parameters. Those parameters are probably encoded in the prosodic structure of the language, the rhythmic structure, or the prominence features in the sounds that are produced in terms of the words, the constituents, and the sentences. So music, in this sense, is in the process of discovering those things. So my idea about the history of music is one of experimentation, selection, and then synthesis. And then in the synthesis mode, experimentation occurs again. Certain items are selected out of that because they feed into certain innate properties. Then there is a synthesis, and then it moves on and on until we reach, basically, Haydn. And that's it. That's the end of the natural musical system, the diatonic musical system.
You said Haydn?
Haydn, yes. Not Mozart, not Beethoven. Those are all people that use the incredible innovations and discoveries of Haydn. Now, before Haydn, of course, you have Sammartini. After Haydn, you have Mozart, and you have Beethoven. But Haydn is kind of a critical figure in that period. So this is what we're aiming to get to, and then beyond. Okay, that is my approach to music history. I think it's the only, really the only approach that a serious musician ought to take, because it puts things into perspective. It shows you how we arrive at Webern and Schoenberg. It shows you how we arrive at electric counterpoint, which is one of my favorite pieces. You know that piece? We're going to listen to it, and the multiple perversions of that have been passed around on the internet. Okay, all right, let's go to Siddhartha. To be continued. I hope that you find this discussion of the music element interesting, because I do. All right, so the last time we basically ended the first section, and this little last chapter of the first section is Gesundheit, called Awakening. You know, I think it's a kind of ironic chapter, but you wouldn't know that until you continued on. Siddhartha has left the Buddha, and he's become awake. He reflected deeply, page 30, until his feeling completely overwhelmed him, and he reached a point where he recognized causes. For to recognize causes, it seemed to him, is to think, and through thought alone, feelings become knowledge and are not lost, but become real and begin to mature. Slowly, next page, slowly the thinker went on his way and asked himself, what is it that you wanted to learn from teachings and teachers? And although they taught you much, what was it that they could not teach you? And he thought, it was the self. And then he goes on from there, and then he finally says, where it says that an icy despair. Yes, let's go page 33. Siddhartha stood still for a moment, and an icy chill stole over him. He shivered inwardly, like a small animal, a bird or hare. This is the line that I tried to connect with the Neruda poem last week. When he realized how alone he was. He had been homeless for years and had not felt like this. Now he did feel it. Previously, when in deepest meditation, he was still his father's son, was a Brahmin, or high-standing religious man. Now, he was only Siddhartha. So that means he's still somebody. Deeply and for a moment, he shuddered. Nobody was as alone as he. And so he shouts, I'm awake, finally I'm awake. I can start all over again. I'm a child, I'm childlike. I'll start my life all over again. Okay, and that he does. Right, in the next section, you have Kamala. Who is that? Kamala was a courtesan. What is a courtesan? What? A prostitute. But a prostitute is a high-class one, right? That's used to living in high style, right? Oh, yeah. Oh. Pleasure. Or whatever. Okay. I don't want to get into trouble for saying too much. As it goes on, we're going to get into more trouble. Okay. So what happens? He's wandering around, and then he comes to this town, and
he meets the ferry. Did we already talk?
What?
That's later.
That's later. He meets the ferryman.
No, he met the ferryman before he
For the
meets
first
Kamala.
time.
Yeah.
Does he? Oh, that's right.
Yeah, he meets the ferryman, but
You're
the
right.
ferryman in this context shelters him and takes him across the river.
And says, we'll
And
meet
he
again.
says, well, I can't pay you, right? But the ferryman says, you will repay me because I'll see you again,
Right.
And then that's all they do. We don't even, do you understand what his name is?
Do we find that?
It's I can't remember.
Does it say it in that section?
I don't think so.
Later
I
it
don't.
does.
And later it does, but not there.
Oh wait, no.
Well, let's go on.
Okay.
All right. He does have a name. Okay. All right. At the bottom of page 37, Siddhartha, but a fleeting and elusive veil before his eyes, regarded with distrust, condemned to be disregarded and ostracized from the thoughts, because it was not reality. Because reality lay on the other side of the visible. But now his eyes lingered on this side, the side of the visible. He saw and recognized the visible, and he sought his place in the world. He did not seek reality. His goal was not on any other side. The world was beautiful when looked at in this way, without any seeking, so simple, so childlike, and on, so childlike, and on. The end of that paragraph. Strength and desire were reflected in the swiftly moving whirls of water formed by the raging pursuer. He talks about his experience of looking down at these carp or whatever they are. Okay. Then what happens to him? He goes into town, right? And he meets what?
Tradesman? Or the merchant, whatever that guy is.
Well,
He meets the ferryman, and then he goes into town and he meets another prostitute.
yes.
Um,
Well, not at well. He
Or
meets a
some
woman
sort of
by the
person.
brook. Yes. And that woman is washing clothes, right? And what's the encounter there? What does she do? This is so great.
Oh, she comes on and he is not into
Yeah. Well, she reaches out and taps his foot, right, with her
Right.
foot, and this automatically turns the machine on, right? And what does he do?
Says goodbye.
that. He aborts.
Well, first
He
he's like,
stooped a little towards the woman and kissed the brown tip of her breast. Looking up, he saw her face smiling, full of desire, and her half-closed eyes pleading and longing. Siddhartha also felt a longing and the stir of sex in him, but as he had never yet touched a woman, he hesitated a moment, although his hands were ready to seize her. At that moment, he heard his inward voice, and the voice said, "No!"
Oh, I didn't know Siddhartha was a Southern Baptist.
Oh, well, apropos, today all across Fox News was the announcement about the parking meter expiration of Billy Graham.
Oh, yeah.
Really good.
yeah.
Right, but 99 years old. I hope that I make it to 99. The 90 and 9. Isn't that an old gospel hymn? Okay. All right, so he decides that even though he's filled with this ardent desire, he's not going to get involved with that. Okay, so what happens next? He goes into town and meets this guy, right?
Who works for...
On page 43. I'm still a samana, he thought, still an ascetic and a beggar. I cannot remain one. I cannot enter the grove like this. And he laughed. What is he talking about?
He can't get on Kamala while
it-
he looks like
yes.
a beggar.
Right, his first glimpse of Kamala, right? And he says he can't go in there looking like that because he's now awakened. He is apparently sexually awakened. Yep. Wow, okay. And so he goes and he meets this man who is eventually going to give him a shave, right, and clean him up a little bit and put oil in his hair. Seems like to me that would make it dirtier, but, you know. And then it says, towards evening, he made friends with the barber's assistant whom he had seen working in the shade of an arch, found him again at prayer in the temple of Vishnu, where he related to him stories about Vishnu and Lakshmi. Isn't Lakshmi, isn't she one of the announcers on NPR?
Well, not as much anymore, but yeah.
I hear her all the time driving back to New York.
Actually, say.
Who in the world is Lakshmi? And who in the world is Vishnu? Somebody enlighten me.
Lakshmi is the Hindu goddess of wealth, fortune, and prosperity. She is the wife and Shakti, which translates to energy, probably roughly, of Vishnu, one of the principal deities of Hinduism and the supreme being in the Vaishnavism tradition.
So who is Vishnu? Let's be more
One of the-
specific than that.
Vishnu is principal deity.
What is the Trimurti?
Preserver.
You know
Three,
this.
yeah.
What?
The three that are one, like three versions of
The same
the
thing.
supreme, yeah.
Yes.
And when they're in one body,
Right. Well, boy, that's a concept that's familiar in other religions, yes?
yeah.
All right, well, what is the Trimurti? Who's the first?
Krishna?
Brahma. Brahma, and in the middle is Vishnu, and in the end is Shiva. Yes. Okay? So what is Brahma? The creator. And who is Shiva? The destroyer. Right? And who's in the middle?
The preserver.
The sustainer, the preserver. It's very interesting to read about those three components. It's a remarkable view of the world. Remember, this is an ancient view of the world. And it originates in, the human mind. Yes, you have a question? Okay. It's fascinating, I think. Okay. All right. Now, what happens? The next encounter with Kamala is, I think, remarkably prescient and relevant to today's world, and one of the things that is going on in the world right now. And I call it Fear, Men and Women. Camille Paglia, one of my great heroes who teaches at the University of the Arts down the road, has retreated into academia, has a new book. It's actually a collection of essays, and it's called Strong Women or Free Women, Strong Men or Free Men. And it's a study of gender, sex, and feminism. And it's an incredible collection of essays. And in it, she repeats her seminal essay in her big, huge book from the 90s called Sexual Personae. And that is well worth reading. And she is a staunch feminist, but she's not the kind of feminist that is what she calls second-wave feminism. And it's surprising that in rereading this section, it reminds me so much of the kind of feminism that she is talking about. And the kind of feminism that Paglia represents is equal men and women. Men and women are equal in the workplace, they're equal in other respects, but there are gender differences, right? You must recognize that. In other words, you must recognize biology. What is the encounter with Siddhartha and Kamala here? It's a discussion of fear. Kamala laughed and said, "No, he is not yet good enough. He must have clothes, fine clothes, and shoes, fine shoes," page 45, "and plenty of money in his purse, and presents for Kamala. Do you know how, Samana, from the woods? Do you know, understand? Do you understand?" "I understand very well," cried Siddhartha. "How could I fail to understand it when it comes from such a mouth? Your mouth is like a freshly cut fig. My lips are also red and fresh, and will fit yours well. You will see. But tell me, fair Kamala, are you not at all afraid of this Samana from the forest who has come to learn about love? Why should I be afraid of a Samana? A stupid Samana from the forest who comes from the jackals and does not know anything about women. Oh, the Samana is strong and afraid of nothing. He could force you, fair maiden. He could rob you. He could hurt you. No, Samana, I am not afraid. Has a Samana or a Brahmin ever feared that someone could make and strike him and rob him of his knowledge, of his piety, of his power for depth of thought? No, because they belong to himself, and he can only give of them what he wishes, and if he wishes. That is exactly how it is with Kamala. And if he wishes. That is how it is with Kamala and with the pleasures of love. Fair and red are Kamala's lips, but try to kiss them against her will, and not one drop of sweetness will you obtain from them, although they know well how to give sweetness. You are an apt pupil, Siddhartha, so learn also this. One can beg, buy, be presented with, and find love in the streets, but it can never be stolen. You have misunderstood. Yes, it would be a pity if a fine young man like you misunderstood.
Funny that her examples sort of went over everything that he's done, in a sense. This bag, I'm not sure about the bot. He's been presented with and found love in the streets the previous day, right?
Well,
didn't
yeah.
find it,
But now that he's been awakened, it's not his right or privilege to take whatever he wants. Isn't that what you're saying?
yeah, but I don't think he ever did. What she's saying is he hasn't stolen anything, but all the things that he hasn't stolen are all the things that he had.
But now, in the
See,
presence of her,
it's the same. It's the same as all his previous lives, even before he was awake.
really?
Well, he begged. He bought when he was awakened. He was presented with love in the streets, and it was
But-
never stolen.
Isn't it a different story with Kamala? That's why she says you've misunderstood.
Because I think in this case, it's something that he really wants, but she's saying that if he takes it against her will, he won't enjoy it the way that it's really meant to be enjoyed.
Well, he won't understand it.
Yeah.
But that stands apart from her examples. One can beg, buy, be presented.
Why does it stand apart from her examples? He's saying that you can do all this stuff,
Yes, he is, but
but you cannot take it from me.
Yeah, no, but one can beg, buy, be presented with, and find love in the street doesn't have to do with something being taken. It has these examples are things that you aren't done by stealing, which are also coincide with things that Siddhartha's done and not stolen. It's
Well,
just
I'm not
there's
sure.
just an interesting parallelism to his life in that sentence.
If you want to think that, I think so. But on the other hand, I think that he is so filled with passion, he immediately wants to engage with her.
Yes, but
But she
this is
says,
a
no,
secondary
that's
point.
that's a misunderstanding of the desires that have awakened in you.
Yeah, that's true. This is a secondary. This is a completely different point I'm talking about.
And what is that point again?
One can beg, buy, be presented with, and find love in the streets are all things that have happened to Siddhartha.
Beg or buy, right?
Yeah.
They have happened to that. I don't think he's bought in the streets. I don't think he has looked for it in the streets.
Well, he was presented with love in the streets.
That has to do with the awakening of sexual desire.
But was he not presented with love in the streets?
I don't think so. That was by a brook.
Oh, whoops.
A minor, well, not a minor point. I think you're right that there's an interplay between his previous training or his life and his, and thinking about all of that. But my main point here is the relationship of men and women, right? And I think that's a very profound point. And I think it's something that is definitely lost in the fray. Power belongs to women. It also belongs to men, I think. But women are free and men are free. Women are as powerful, or maybe even more powerful, than men. As a matter of fact, in the beginning, in the emergent civilization, the woman was the one that had all the power and were worshipped as the one, the bringer, the giver of life, mysterious one. Okay, all right, let's go on. What are the three things that Siddhartha has learned?
So like I can think, fast,
Wait.
I can think, I can wait, and I can fast. And she says, well, what use is that, right? Is that going to earn you money?
eventually.
Well, it does, right? So what is the idea behind think and waiting and can fast? Now this is a very interesting point here, because thinking or contemplating and waiting, right, and fasting are all aspects of an ascetic nature, right, of a spiritual nature. But can he use those in the pursuit of material goods?
Well, doesn't he use them later when he works?
Yes, he does use them later. There's an amazing scene in one of the greatest science fiction films ever made. And it's a remake of the 1950, what is his name, John Huston? I don't know. Right, Huston, right? The Thing. And I love that 1950s film, The Thing. But John Carpenter's remake of that is like that film revved up. It's on like steroids or whatever. And when we used to go to Beaver Creek skiing, and Allie and Brenda were going out downhill skiing, I would be at home working on I would always do my cross-country skiing in Vail, and I would come home, and I always watched that movie every single year, because it's in the snow, or it's in the North Pole, yeah, I think.
What movie is it?
What?
What movie?
The Thing. John Carpenter's The Thing. Well, that's an incredible film, and it's played to the hilt. And at the very end of the film, there are these two guys left, right? And neither one of them knows if they had actually become the Thing, because the thing could morph into these things and kind of keep itself going. Well, the two of them, the whole place is burning up. And the two guys are sitting there, and there's one guy says, well, now, what do we do? And the other guy says, I don't know. We'll just watch and wait. Okay, all right. I thought that was incredibly significant. It is, right? What is watching and waiting? What does that eventually do?
Thinking and fasting.
No. In that movie, what does it mean? That watching and waiting is going to decide the course of action, right? Obviously. And the movie ends right there. You don't know. It could be that both of them are infected, and one of them, but they don't know. Okay, well, at any rate. So we have here the watching, the waiting, and the fasting. What is the fasting?
Denial.
Denial, yes, is denial or abnegation. And then the watching and the waiting is patience, right? And then the answer should come by watching and waiting, not anything that you have pre-decided to do. All right. So how does this unfold? What is the lesson of waiting, and what is the lesson of waiting? What does it say at the very end of this chapter? My dear Kamala, said Siddhartha, when I came to you in your grove, I made the first step. It was my intention to learn about love from the most beautiful woman. From the moment I made that resolution, I also knew that I would execute it. I made that resolution. I would execute it. I knew that you would help me. I knew it from your first glance at the entrance to the grove. And if I had not wanted, but you did want, listen, Kamala, when you throw a stone into the water, it finds the quickest way to the bottom of the water. Well, sometimes. It is the same when Siddhartha has an aim or a goal. Siddhartha does nothing. He waits, he thinks, he fasts. It should be he wants, right? Okay? He waits, he thinks, he fasts. But he goes through the affairs of the world like a stone through the water, without doing anything, without bestirring himself. And he is drawn and lets himself fall. He is drawn by his goal, for he does not allow anything to enter his mind which opposes his goal. That is what Siddhartha learned from the Samanas. It is what fools call magic, and what they think is caused by demons. Nothing is caused by demons. There are no demons. Everyone can perform magic. Everyone can reach his goal if he can think, fast, and wait. Kamala listened to him. She loved his voice. She loved the look in his eyes, etc. Perhaps it is as you say, my friend, she said softly. And perhaps it is also because Siddhartha is a handsome man, because his glance pleases women, that he is lucky. Siddhartha kissed her and said goodbye. May it be so, my teacher. May my glance always please you. May good fortune always come to me from you. Now, what is the situation that Hermann Hesse is trying to communicate here? Put this all together, and it's going to transpire. The next chapter is among the people. It's where he meets Kamaswami, right? Do they still make Kawasaki motorcycles?
Yeah.
I had a Honda. Better. What is this all about? What about Siddhartha's goal and his, the idea of goal? He keeps mentioning goal.
His goal keeps
And then think fast and, wait, right? And that he's not affected by, he won't be affected by the world or by the things. That he's like the stone that bypasses all of that and sinks to the bottom to achieve his goal.
His goal keeps changing throughout the book.
Well, yeah. So what does that all imply? You don't know this yet, but doesn't it kind of cast an ironic character on that awakening chapter? And this is actually continuing that. So what is he actually awakened to?
Passion.
The opposite of
And what's another word for passion? Just
Desire.
what?
Desire.
Yes, desire. Desire is thingness, is it not? I desire this, I desire that. I want this, I want that. Well, what was the purpose of the samanas that he found so intriguing? Is the denial of all of the things, right? The suppression of desire
so it's
through meditation and through all these other things, which he actually is turning against. He says, I've learned all these things, but that's really not the way. The reason he left and went to the hermits is because he felt that his life with his father and the life that he was living was not the thing, that he had to leave his family and abandon all of that. And then he followed the samanas, and then he didn't follow, but he learned something from the Buddha, and now that's all put behind him. And now he's awake, and he now knows what his new goal is. The goal always keeps changing. And what is he going to find out?
it's kind of funny because he's
Read the
like
Hickey.
Bible.
Read the Hickey essay. Okay.
I was gonna say it's kind of funny and ironic because he's like suppressing all of his other desires to like, you know, get what he's really looking for. Like this, yeah.
However, there's a twist in all of this, I think. What is sex? I'm sure you're all acquainted with the topic, right? There are many psychiatrists, or not psychiatrists per se, but psychologists that think that the sexual act, in the consummation of the sexual act, you lose yourself, right? That's kind of a sub-theme in all. I know you have no idea what I'm talking about, but it is that idea of union or whatever, and where the concept of self is like abandoned, and you're, you know, in a different state of consciousness or awareness. You've never heard of that? Right. And I think that is that is something that goes on and on with the kind of justification for marital bliss or marital relationships, is the idea that you become selfless in that act. And in that act you could, you know, create another human being. And it's an interesting idea, but that might be true for every other living entity or species in the world. But it is not true, per se, for human beings, for one reason. What is that? Why is the act of procreation not the same as sexuality in human beings? Why would you think?
Well, procreation comes from the drive to preserve yourself. Continuity.
Or the
species.
the blind drive to preserve your species. Yeah, I would say that. In human sexuality, it's more what you're phrasing. It's the desire to continue yourself. So therefore, human sexuality is centered more or less in what? One of my great mentors, one of the greatest, always said, why is human sexuality such a problem? Which it is. It's created. I mean, look at the world today. Look at this, right? It generates huge problems. Why is it such a problem? Can you guess? Don't think or wait too long. Class will be over. Why is it such a problem? Is it strictly procreative?
No.
Obviously not.
Like anything but a lot of the time.
Not in human beings. As a matter of fact, it is primarily not that, right? So what is it rooted in?
Pleasure.
Yeah, well, okay. And the perception of pleasure in terms of the human mind is what? It's a sensation. Pleasure has to generate some kind of sensation, whether it's on a roller coaster or whatever, right? Those are sensory perceptions that are if an animal approaches a burning a fire, what does it do? Say, oh, well, let me investigate this. I'll stick my paw in that. Oh, That hurts. I will leave it.
Probably the first time.
Doesn't do that at all.
Instinct
Well, there
is-
would be
is
no
hard.
first time except, the perception of immediate danger and a recoiling. And that is a survival effect. It's a direct response of pain receptors and a knee-jerk reaction. Right? That is not the case in human beings.
So are you saying that like sexuality is not a survival mechanism, despite the fact that we all have a need to continue?
Yes, I'm saying that. It's rooted in some kind of psychology, is it not?
Okay.
There's a psychological attribute to human sexuality that is not present in our closest relatives. So it creates enormous problems. And the whole issue of the relationship with Kamala is rooted exactly in that property. Because eventually what happens? Does it provide Siddhartha with great joy and satisfaction? If you've read the book, it turns into an unmitigated tragedy and a sorrow and despair. Not the kind of despair that he recognizes when he thinks he's free and alone, right? A totally different kind of despair.
He's free and he's alone.
So I think that this little book is far from being on the list of the 8th grade reading list. It has profound significance for your growth as an adult. Thank you very much. So does the Dufay Mass. Okay. Thank you so much. I'll see you next week. Please read the Hickey essay. Thank you. Bye-bye.